Hello, this is Angela with Progress Permaculture. I'm out in Beaverton, that's a suburb west of Portland today. I'm out here twice a week for my kids to take some classes, two of my kids. And I have noticed something out here that I wanted to talk about today. I have a lot of videos on mulching in the garden and how important it is to mulch and not have bare, unprotected soil being baked by the sun and eroded by wind and rain, right? It is something that I have found incredibly important. It's kind of one of those linchpins in my garden design, is to employ significant and varied mulching methods around the yard. Particularly for me, because my garden started out with no topsoil whatsoever. It started out a thin layer of grass and weeds when we bought the house, and then just subsoil, which in my area is clay and basically like river rocks and rocks from when like the glaciers receded and deposited that kind of like alluvial backfill here all throughout the Willamette Valley. So no organic matter in my soil. So for me, I knew that mulching was a strategy that stacked functions. In permaculture, when we say stacking functions, that means that one element does more than one job. And you get kind of a diversity of yields out of one element that you implement in your garden. So for me, mulch was about shading the soil, preventing any erosion, and kind of protecting it. But then because I didn't really have topsoil to begin with, it was also about building up soil. It was about increasing the biomatter in my soil. Making sure that I was adding that rich humus. What did that look like initially? Well, I used cardboard, I used newspaper, several layers thick to create kind of that base layer, and then I put organic matter on top. So I would use straw, I would use hay, I would use chicken manure. I posted on social media and asked for people's bedding from their goats and rabbits that would have then that rich nitrogen manure, as well as the kind of brown matter of the straw that they were using for bedding. I would get bags of leaves from folks in the neighborhood. And because I didn't really have any trees, the one tree in our yard had been cut down. I had this huge patch of bamboo that was along the fence line. And I spent a couple of years removing that. And I would use the bamboo, not the rhizomes, those went in the yard waste bin, but the stalks and leaves above ground. I would chop them up and leave them in the sun to really, really desiccate and bake. And all of those impacts of the sun that I didn't want on my soil, I wanted them on the prunings from the bamboo to kill them so that they would then not risk zero risk of them regerminating because it was invasive bamboo. But then I could use that dead brown matter to build organic matter. So my mulch was just like whatever I could use. And the more I grew plants in the garden, it would also be chop and drop green mulches. So comfrey or rhubarb leaves or any kind of like herbaceous plants where I could chop up and throw back stems and leaves that I didn't need. All of that was mulch. And then I started contacting the electric company, and I would get wood chips dumped in my yard. And that was a really kind of pivotal moment for me in exponentially increasing the amount of mulch that I had in the garden, but also exponentially increasing the rate at which I built soil with that mulch as it decomposed. So I would have lots and lots and lots of wood chips in the garden. And then chip drop became a thing. I have a number of videos on chip drop, so please check those out. And I kind of transitioned from, well, I still use chop and drop quite a bit for my own garden, but I no longer import things like poultry bedding and goat and rabbit bedding from people in my garden groups, or I no longer source leaves from the neighborhood. I have enough leaves for my own trees and enough wood chips to have a sufficient quantity of mulch in my garden. Now, okay, Angela, you've given this long list of all the different kinds of mulches that you have historically used and that you use now. Okay, what is the common denominator between all of those mulches? They are all organic material. They are all material that will decompose and become humus. And that means that those kinds of mulches have to constantly be replenished, right? So I spoke at the beginning of this video about how mulch is stacking functions, right? So I'm shading the soil and preventing erosion, particularly when you have dense clay subsoil. It doesn't absorb water really well. And so if you build up just a little bit of organic matter and you have any kind of a slope, it acts like a chute, right? Like chutes and ladders. It acts like a chute for the water to just, absolutely erode what little bit you have built on top. So making sure that there's a good thick layer of mulch that will hold that thin layer of topsoil against the subsoil until it can get built up more substantially was really important. There's also the issue of weed suppression. So that's the third of the stacking functions. Weed suppression was really important because I started out with a garden that was 100% weeds, right? And I knew not only were there a lot of rhizomatous weeds, right? Like loads of quackgrass. I've talked about this in the past. That is the one kind of really persistent weed I've had to deal with in my garden, despite filling, yard waste container after yard waste container after yard waste container with quackgrass rhizomes. I end up having volunteers now and then, no matter what. So not only was it the kind of persistent weeds that were already there, but it was also the deposition of all of these seeds in the garden that were just waiting to germinate, weed seeds that had blown in from various sources. And we're just waiting for any kind of disturbance in the soil. So if I could avoid disturbing the soil and I could mulch on top of them and suppress those weeds, I was going to reduce how many of those living weeds were able to break through, kind of weaken them, kill them off, and then also suppress germination of any weed seeds that were in the ground. So mulching was really effective for that. But because I'm using organic mulches, they break down. And if I want to continue to have that weed suppression, and I want to continue to have that benefit of the mulch shading the soil and holding moisture against the soil, conserving water, preventing the humus in the soil from being baked by the rays of the sun, I have to replenish it. And I think that's a frustration that a lot of gardeners have, is that the job is never done, right? We have to continue to add mulch. And the more bioactive your garden is, the more the microbiome in your soil is thriving and multiplying, and the more active it is, the quicker all of those microbes are breaking down your fresh addition of mulch. And so what I have found is over time, I have to add more mulch more often, because it just very quickly turns into soil. And this is a topic for another video soon this spring, but I am beginning to have a problem where I kind of have too much soil. I'm building up the layers too much, and that encroaches upon my house, my foundation, because I am having this kind of rapid decomposition of the mulch that I add and needing to add more and more. And too much humus is a good thing. That's not a bad thing to have. That's a good problem. That's a problem that can easily turn into a solution, but it is something to be aware of. So because folks don't want the additional labor, and it is labor intensive to add a lot of mulch, and they don't want to deal with having to repeat that chore frequently, people turn to inorganic mulches in order to suppress weeds and potentially shade the soil. Mostly suppress weeds, I think, is probably, if I had to hazard a guess, is the primary reason that people use inorganic mulches. And I've talked about a couple of these in the past. One is landscape fabric, which I think is such a deceptive name. It's not fabric in terms of organic, like cotton or whatever. It is plastic, and landscape fabric is a disaster for most people. Maybe not you if you're putting it in, but the next homeowner down the road is, because as it breaks down, it sheds microplastic pollution into the soil, and it becomes this shreddy mess in itself that future gardeners, or maybe you 20 years from now, will have a devil of a time removing it. As the roots of trees and the roots of weeds become all enmeshed and entangled with your landscape fabric, and as it becomes this kind of shreddy, horrible mess that is just flinging microplastic all around your yard. If I see somebody recommending landscape fabric, that's a giant red flag that I am not interested in any of their garden advice. So, and the second thing is, look, it took me 10 minutes, but I'm getting back there. The second thing is something that I've noticed here around Beaverton, and I don't see it that much in Portland, and that is what we call tire crumb mulch. Basically shredded car tires that are, aesthetically, they sort of appear to look a little bit like wood chips from a distance, right? But it's just chipped up tires. And, I want to talk about that for the last couple minutes of this video. Okay, so it might seem on the surface like this is really freaking brilliant, right? We take a waste product and we turn it into a resource. That sounds like permaculture, right? Produce no waste. We're making sure this item doesn't go into the landfill. However, oh, and also we're making sure that this item is reducing the workload for people, right? So we are reducing the burden of labor by saying you only have to mulch once and then you're done, because this kind of mulch does not biodegrade. Okay, now, however, there's a lot of concerns about using tires, and I will briefly talk about the health risk concerns, and I will say that I will again link to all of the research from the EPA down below, which started in, I want to say, like 2015, 2016. Concerns were raised because tires contain carcinogenic compounds. You don't want to be like necessarily growing food in direct contact with tires. And the concern is when you chip up tires and you kind of disrupt the integrity of the tire and you put it outdoors and expose it to all of the elements, expose it to UV radiation, what is leaching out of those tires? And is it leaching into the soil? And then is it being taken up by plants? And then are we eating those plants, right? So really good questions. Now, parents brought concerns to the EPA because these chipped up tires, this tire crumb mulch, was not only being used in terms of like borders in people's gardens as mulch, but also on playgrounds and also on indoor sports fields, where I think a lot of times it's like glued together more like a mat. And so an investigation began, like, what are the concerns here? And are they legitimate? Are they backed up by the data? At the time, there was no research showing either that tire crumb mulch posed a health risk or that it was safe. There was a dearth of data, right? And if you follow this channel very much, you know that like I have some crunchy tendencies, but like I want to follow the data, right? I want to be data driven in my utilization and application of permaculture and any gardening knowledge. So if there is compelling data that shows me something that I have been doing is like actually not effective or is actively harmful, I'm going to change the way that I'm doing it. So we can't make a plan of action around tire crumb mulch without data. So the EPA is like, okay, we need to start researching this. We need to explore what compounds exist in tires. Are they leaching into the environment? Are they not only leaching into the soil, but are they, being emitted from the mulch into the atmosphere, right? And are they of concern? So some studies were done. So they examined the tires, both the tires on indoor and outdoor settings. And from a very small sample size, like 45 locations, I want to say. And so not like a huge sample size, but they did look at a range of age of those locations, right? So how long had the tires been sitting out in the sun and the weather? How long had people been treading on them? And there were something like 30 VOCs that these tires were emitting. And what the data has shown so far is the biggest concern is zinc, which is emitted in very high levels from tires. And if you're a gardener, that's a concern for your plants, because zinc, too much zinc in the soil is going to impede the development and the photosynthesis of your plants. So direct concern right there. Right? Just one. In terms of the health implications for us, I think the jury is still really out. And I know that the EPA said they want to conduct more research, but the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed them down. And so there is not a lot of health recommendation information out there as of right now. I'll say if you are concerned about the fact that tires, which contain potentially carcinogenic material, I think like class 1 carcinogens, right? And class 2 and 2A. So concerns about carcinogenic material, go and look at the data for yourself. I always encourage you, like, don't just read the headlines of some news article. Go read the original studies, go read the research, look at the methods, look at the sample size, and look at what the data says, and then look at the conclusions that the actual researchers are making from the data. So jury's still out a little bit on whether they're safe to using playgrounds and sports fields and mulch. I keep looking over here because there's a big pile of it right out the window. So I wish I could offer some better guidelines, but the EPA doesn't actually have really good guidelines other than to say the concerns about the VOCs being emitted into the atmosphere is pretty negligible when you're looking at outdoor application. But in terms of impact to the soil and in terms of impact runoff into waterways, that has not been assessed yet. There's a little bit more concerned about VOCs being emitted in indoor spaces from this kind of mulch, but again, not my wheelhouse, not my area. For me as a permaculturist, even if there is no reason to be concerned about using tire crumb mulch in the garden in terms of what kinds of compounds may be leached from those tires by sun, wind, rain. No concerns about what it might mean for the watershed, no concerns about what it might mean for our health, because there is no data showing that we should be freaking out yet. There are plenty of other reasons why I think they are terrible to use in the garden or anywhere outdoors. Number one is that the way that you put down tire crumb mulch is on top of landscape fabric. Tire crumb mulch is not an effective weed barrier on its own at all. And that requires the initial application of landscape plastic, right? Which earlier in this video, I talked about how if you were recommending using it, I just want to not listen to anything you have to say after that because it's a terrible idea. And so the fact that they have to be used in concert with each other says to me that nope, that's a hard no. You could say Angela, what if I choose to use a more sustainable weed barrier like thick burlap or cardboard? Well, then that would require you potentially semi-annually or annually, let's say you get really lucky, you live in a really dry climate every 2 years, pulling back all of your tire crumb mulch and then relaying a new foundation of weed barrier and putting your tire crumb mulch back on top. Doesn't sound like we're actually saving labor that way. It sounds really annoying. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have to pick little bits of rubber out of my soil every couple of years in order to put down a new weed barrier. Okay, so that's the first concern. Second concern is that tire crumb mulch has no benefit to the soil. And in permaculture, we're looking to stack functions. We're looking to add as much benefit as we possibly can. So why use something that brings no positive benefit to the garden? Or maybe one, it looks like wood chips, but we're not getting the building of soil. We're not getting the feeding the fungal life and the soil microbiome. We're not enriching anything in our garden, right? If anything, we are maintaining a level of no additional biomass being built in that area where we're using tire crumb mulch. And at worst, we're looking at suppressing whatever accumulation of biomatter would normally happen, right? Because you have this layer of sheet of plastic and rubber chips. And tires don't just contain rubber, right? There's lots of bits of plastic and metal that are also in chipped up tires. What are we doing for the wildlife? So in permaculture, we want to build diverse garden ecosystems, right? We want to support native wildlife at the same time producing food for us. So let's say you know better than to use this in an area of your garden where you're growing food. But what is it doing for the wildlife, right? What habitat is it creating? It's not creating habitat. It's not doing it. And also on hot days, it is getting incredibly hot to have that black rubber mulch. Think about anything black in the city on a hot sunny day. You are using mulch because you want to shade the soil and reduce soil temperatures. And I have not found any good studies about what happens to the soil temperature when you use these kind of mulches. Again, there's a dearth of data.
Not to mention the fire risk for folks who use this around their gardens and around their businesses if they live in a fire-prone area.
And then let's talk about the aesthetics for a second. We want our gardens to be beautiful. My idea of beautiful is not a very highly manicured idea of beautiful. I want biodiversity. I want a naturalistic garden. What I don't think, tire crumb mulch is giving you is either of those things. It's obviously not giving you a naturalistic garden, but it's not giving you a highly manicured garden either. What does rubber do? It bounces, right? And one of the things I've noticed around here in Beaverton is that tire crumb mulch does not stay where you put it. It likes to migrate. Worse, I think, than a pea gravel mulch does. It's bouncy and it gets kicked out. People bump it with their foot and those little pieces get kicked out everywhere and pose a tripping hazard. Here, as I'm looking out the window, I'll show you in a minute, it's all over the sidewalks, little hard bits of rubber, because it doesn't stay put. And then you end up with exposed, wrinkled landscape fabric. You end up with the bits of tire mulch themselves moved off of the landscape fabric and into soil where they become embedded in the soil and they're a pain in the butt and you got to pick out every little piece. It's just a mess. So when we're looking at mulches for the soil, it can be really tempting to be we as humans, we can just engineer better, or we can just use, better living through plastic. And better living through listening to what capitalism tells us, where they're going to take something that's really a garbage product and they're going to greenwash it. And they're going to say, this is a green source of mulch. This is a sustainable solution for you. When really it's not. So I think when we're looking at those kind of non-organic mulches, we need to be really savvy. If we're being sold something in a bag, is this really better for the environment? Is it really better for our garden? It's being sold to us as reduce, reuse, repurpose. But is that really what's happening here? Or is it somebody profiting off of selling their garbage to us and kind of hoodwinking us? And what are the greater implications in terms of the health and environmental impacts of what we're using? Again, jury's out a little bit on those. Please read, my tummy's growling. Please read the data below. And in terms of actual efficacy in the garden, are we really saving labor? Are we really increasing the beauty in our garden? Are we really getting the results that we want? So for me, whenever I walk by these patches of tire crumb mulch out here, it just feels like this glaring, huge sign of like, here is the poster child for everything that is wrong with capitalism trying to sell us sustainability. Because it is something that is pitched to us as being more sensible, more economical, more environmentally friendly. But it's actually none of those things. It's actually causing us to spend money when we could use a free resource like Chip Drop. And not only that, but it's creating a problem for us down the road, a problem for people that use our property down the road, or creating an immediate problem for us of like, it's not solving the thing that we wanted to have solved in the beginning. For me, I have found that when we're looking at mulches, free, organic, locally sourced is always best. A diversity of mulches works great. Using what you have, what is readily available in your community. Posting on your Buy Nothing page, asking for people's bags of leaves in the fall. Growing items for chop and drop, right? Growing those large leafy vegetables, growing that comfrey, growing shrubs that you can chop and drop, especially nitrogen fixing shrubs that are really prolific that you can chop and drop multiple times in a season. Excellent. Something like chip drop, something like using your electric utility, something like investing in a community tool library where you can have a community chipper so that you all can get together and chip up your limbs from your prunings in the fall, right? All of those excellent ways to do mulch. I think that when we're looking at mulching in the garden, it's such an important element of sustainable garden design. It's such an effective element. And we have to make sure that we're doing it right, that we're doing it in a way that matches our values and gives us the yield that we want and doesn't create problems further down the road. And I think we have to be really careful in permaculture. We all earnestly want to create a better world. We all earnestly want to reduce the harm that we cause to the planet. And I think that corporations and, business people can be really aware of that, aware of our good intention, and can exploit it in order to market something to us under the guise of sustainability and, under the guise of doing something good, when really what it is just creating profit for them and creating a problem for us down the road, not creating the solution that we need and also giving us a headache as well. So, I think we need to be idealistic. I think there's nothing wrong with being idealistic, but I think we also need to be really savvy about the tools that we're implementing. And we need to be really skeptical of people who are trying to sell us a product and claim that it is green, claim that it is sustainable, claim that it is reducing waste. We need to be, doing our due diligence, a phrase I use a lot on this channel. We need to be investigating whether those claims actually match up to reality, because we may have the best intentions, but I think the folks marketing products to us don't, right? So for me, I will stick to free, locally sourced, organic mulches. And in doing so, I have not gone wrong in the last 15 years, right? That method has not let me down. But let's not be lured in by the literal garbage of plastic and tires and landscape fabric when we are mulching in the garden. Let's not create problems for ourselves down the road. Let's be skeptical of folks who are selling us something that sounds like it's too good to be true. So I think I'm gonna go for a run. It's not raining here in Portland. Lovely blue sky. I've not really felt up to running lately, but I feel up to it today. So I'm gonna go for it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all are staying well. I hope that you're getting excited about spring and thinking about those things like, what mulch am I gonna put down this spring for the garden? I have a lot going on in my yard. It's a lot of cleanup. I am so far behind, and I look forward to showing you all kind of what I'm going to be doing over the next month, because March is a busy season. Please stay well and safe. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and check out the ways you can support my work down below.